Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. Today we have another blast from the past, from the early 90s, a GM. This 1991 GMC Jimmy 2-door 4-wheel drive V6. Haven't seen these around in quite some time. So this one is undergoing a, you could call it a slight restoration. Guy wants to get back on the road. Let's read the customer complaint and do diagnosis. Something to do with a long or a hard crank and a parasitic draw. Oh man, back in the early 90s, you got your GM boxy gauge cluster. Well, let's read the customer complaint here. So, 91 GMC S15 Jimmy 4.3 liter V6. Problems: 1, parasitic battery draw, and 2, odd no crank. Both are repeatable. If the battery is left connected, it will drain to nothing in about 1 week or less. Okay, so not a huge draw, but definitely something there. No crank issue is a little harder to explain, but is easily repeatable. When turning the key to start the engine, it will routinely engage the starter but not crank over. Okay. Also, holding the key in start position does not crank over the engine. Cycling from the run to start position will have the same effect until after several cycles it will begin to turn the engine over and actually fire up. It's usually a longer crank, but it will start the engine once it finally begins to turn it over. This is not a typical crank no start, but something weirder. I'm unsure the problems are related. History, late 90s. Vehicles on my cousin. So it's from North Carolina. That's why it's still alive in Pennsylvania. Original engine was destroyed. Okay. Used by his grandfather. Parts cannon has been repeatedly loaded and fired to no avail. Bought the vehicle 21. Trying to do some troubleshooting. And so a whole bunch of stuff. Obviously new battery. I mean, the history here is pretty long, but we don't really care as long as we can reproduce the complaint. Okay, so it has batteries and starters and nothing seems to help. Ground cable has been redone. Let's see what it does. So key on. An old voltmeter there is barely above 9 volts. Let's try to crank it. Okay, so very sluggish crank, but once it starts, it seems to run pretty well. So we're going to have to do the classic, battery health check, charging system check, and then measure the parasitic draw. So we're just going to need some meters for this, and it should be pretty quick. Alright, let's start off with our favorite ASTRO DC amp clamp. So first in volts, I just have it connected to battery positive here. The negative is on that end of the negative cable because these are a pain in the butt to clamp onto. See, there's nothing really to clip onto there. But anyways, 14.5 volts. The alternator is doing great. Let's go to the amp settings. So I have it clamped around the negative battery cable. And we have about 10 amps going into the battery. Okay? 8, 9 amps. This battery is, well, it's not fully charged, so let's run it for like 15 minutes, see what the, we want to do all our checks with a fully charged battery. Alright, truck's been running for about 10 minutes. Let's shut it off and see what the battery voltage stabilizes at, just with the key off. It's about, okay, 12.9, so it has a little surface charge. Let's put the meter in the window so we can see the voltage real time when we try to start this thing. Alright, so 12.6 volts. Let's turn the lights on, see what happens. And the key. Oh, that beeper is just annoying. 12 volts. Okay. How fast is it going to drop? It's hanging in there. Let's try to crank it. So about 9 volts and then it turned over. Key on. I'm just going to bump the key. Okay, so not terrible, but I'm suspecting that the parasitic draw has discharged this battery in the past, exactly like we saw on the Mercedes SLK. So once the battery is fully charged, it has enough juice to start the engine a few times, but the voltage just, it can't maintain that 12 volts. It'll drop to 9, almost 8. It's a really sluggish crank. So is it time for a new battery? Probably, but let's do the parasitic draw test and see how big the parasitic draw is, and I think that should be the last step. If there is a draw, we'll track it down. Well, this is a pretty quick one. 7 milliamps battery to ground. That's it. Should we just get him a new battery? That's about it. So it looks like we can fit a bigger battery in here, like the next size up. I know they have a 75 series and a 34 series, so the bigger the better. This one does look a little undersized, 3 years old, and if it's sat for 6 months with this draw, then yeah, the battery would be affected in a bad way. So let me order one up, and we can get one with also the top post terminals for easier testing and jump starting, because this thing doesn't have any dedicated jump start posts, and clipping onto this isn't ideal. So let's get a new battery for this thing. Courtesy of Fisher Auto Parts, we have the correct battery for this vehicle, UL3478. You can see it's like an inch bigger, fits the space nicely, and it has the side terminals and the top terminals for easy testing and jump starting. So this will be an upgrade. 12.6 volts. Let's crank it over, see how it starts. Alright, there's the voltage. Key on. I'll even turn the lights on. Stress this battery out a little bit. 12.4. Fire in the hole. Nope. Try again. So voltage didn't drop below 11.5. That's much better than 8. So that's it. Let's see if the battery's charging, and that's it. This thing should be back in business now. 7 milliamps. As long as you don't leave it for 4 months, it should be fine. So just a weak battery, just like the Mercedes SLK AMG. That's what happens to these vehicles that sit for a long time. Either they're seasonal cars or project cars, and then people get kind of confused, like, oh, I just replaced the battery a few years ago, why is it, it can't possibly be a bad battery. Well, it can. And once you deplete it too many times, batteries just lose their capacity, and then you run into these problems. But good thing you brought it over for a thorough diagnosis. We 100% confirmed there's no big parasitic draw. 7 to 9 milliamps is just fine. So that's it. Maybe we'll take this thing on a test drive for some bonus footage. Alright, let's take this beast for a rip. Fires right up. Charging over 14 volts. Looks good. Alright, let's see how this little truck accelerates. Plenty of torque, V6. fine. So pretty cool that people, you know, invest time and money to keep these old cars on the road. I have a soft spot for old clunkers like this, but hey, they just might outlive a lot of the new cars with all the modules. That's guaranteed. Alright, appreciate everyone watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye. Uh-oh, I don't think we're done. So after running it, letting it sit here for a while, the first time I cranked it, it was like, and then went. So I want to do a voltage and current measurement with the scope to see how much current the starter is drawing and what the voltage level is at the battery. There could still be a voltage drop between, you know, the battery and the starter and this engine block to ground. I mean, it's a lot better, but we want to be 100% here, because if the customer is like, hey, I paid for diagnostics and a new battery and it's still not perfect, then, you know, we have to cover all the bases here. So let's do that. Alright, so we're going full Bernie mode here. We have 4 channels. What are we measuring? Channel 1, the blue channel, I crawled under the truck and put that on the main starter, you know, fat post. So we want to have good feed on there at all times. Channel 2 is on battery positive. So you can see here the red and the blue right now are aligned. They're over 12 volts. If there's a voltage drop between the battery positive terminal and the starter positive terminal, like a poor crimp at a cable or something, we'll see these two traces split. The red one might go a little lower. Channel 3 is on block ground on that side, on the stud of that main negative cable. So, and all the references are to battery negative. Okay? So we might see slightly elevated block ground. I don't know. And then channel 4 is the current going to the starter, or coming back from the starter, since the negative cable is easier to clamp around. So 1 volt is 100 amps. Let's crank it over, see if we see anything interesting. Alright, here we go. Let's watch the screen. So key on and crank. Okay. What the heck was all this stuff? So we can put in a filter, for example, on the green channel. Go to here, activate filtering. There, that's much better. We can see that a lot cleaner now. So what was the voltage drop on the block? About 380 millivolts. That's fine during cranking. What was our starter current? So 1 volt is 100 amps, up to 1.3, so 130 amps. Nothing wrong with that at all. And then what about the voltage drop? Let's activate filtering for the blue channel. That's much nicer. So our voltage drop to 10.5. The blue channel's on the starter, the red channel's on the battery. So you can see on the starter it's a little lower than at the battery. About 11 volts at the battery, 10.3 at the starter. Again, you know, half a volt voltage drop on there, not a big deal, but it cranked up okay. So I want to recreate that. You know, after the test drive, it was really like brr, and then spun it over. So we'll save this and play around with it. So in this case, what can we say? What's left? Well, the starter itself. So when it's barely spinning the engine over, here's when it fires up. It's drawing a maximum of 130 amps. Now, that's not a lot at all. You would expect like 250 on initial. You know, right here, I would expect like 200 to 300 amps. It's not doing that. It's only drawing 130 max. And that's not quite enough. So to get rid of this problem completely, it needs a new quality starter. This starter, maybe the brushes aren't very good, they're not passing enough current, and it's having a hard time turning the engine over. You know, if the starter's stuck and it has good continuity, it should draw like, I don't know, 400 to 500 amps if it's just locked. Once it starts spinning, the current consumption will drop. That's how DC motors work. This one, even on initial bump, only goes up to 130 amps. So if we zoom out, let's just bump the key. See, that's the maximum limit there, 130 amps. Voltage drop is fine. I'm half a volt, no big deal at all. So, Reman starter. It is Reman. It says on there from 2019. Not surprising. Maybe try a different brand. I'll talk to the owner, see what he wants to do. I mean, it starts reliably now. It definitely needed a battery. It was undersized and weak. So now we have a couple more volts. So it's better. It's not bad at all. I mean, you could live with that, especially for a project truck. But that's the diagnosis, so we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Here's a little bonus footage. Another customer request was, can you solder my lift struts to my window? I'm like, what? So apparently the rear defrost grid gets its power and ground through the lift struts. I've never seen anything like this. So there's a little eyelet here. The current goes through here out of this wire, and he wants it soldered right there. So let's strip that back. Same on this side. Got the HAKKO fired up to 600 degrees. That should be sufficient. Put some fresh solder on here and attach this wire. And we have to make sure it doesn't get pinched by the window, so somehow orient that so it's not interfering. Let's try to soften up this 30-year-old solder and see if the iron is hot enough. The glass probably takes up a lot of heat. I mean, that should be sufficient. Let's tin new wire. Maybe I'll clamp it here and then burn it on. Alright, one down. Solid. And that shouldn't get pinched by the weather stripping. Let's repeat on the other side. Alright, here we go. Let's try to soften up the vintage 30-year-old solder up here. So add some new solder and just let the heat soak in. Wonder if this is leaded or unleaded. It's definitely reluctant to start melting, But once there's enough heat in there, it will soften up. Wait until that whole blob gets nice and soft and everything fuses together. Okay. Try a little tug test. Solid. Now let's turn on the rear defog and see if the current is passing through the grid. Alright, got the ammeter right on the lift strut. How convenient. Turn on the key. And where's the, there it is. Where's the, oh, there's the indicator. Okay, indicator's on. No amperage. Well, could be another issue with the defog. I'm fairly sure that there's no like safety cutoff here. Should be on when the glass is on. That's there. That's there. Not sure. Alright, so the quickest way to prove that we have voltage on the circuit is with a test lamp. Now, I set the 1 amp setting because the defogger draws, less than 5 amps. So that's good. Let's we move the clip to here. Yep, we definitely have 12 volts right there. If we leave this here and move the ground clip to here. Ah, interesting. So we have ground here, but no ground right here. And if we wiggle, so this shaft is grounded, but this piece, oh, there we go. You heard that? Just bad contact in the strut itself. So now we have a good ground. And look, 5 amps going through the defogger. Excellent. So, solder these on. There's still, there's a port contact here. We just wiggle it around. Looks like it works. I don't know how it's supposed to. It's supposed to be a spring in there. Try to improve that, because every time you open and close the lift gate, you're going to lose that connection. Alright, so I improved the connections on these crappy aftermarket lift struts. Just kind of sanded that surface there so this makes contact with the body. Then bent this little clip up so it's a little tighter on there. And now when we lower and close the gate, constant 4 amps. I'm happy with that.